I'm pleased to introduce the session speaker for our next session, Daniel Cybulskie. Daniel is the head of Solutions Engineering Canada for Zscaler. With over 15 years experience in information security, he has a broad technical background ranging from, in old days, a router, switch, now the identity, PKI, encryption, wireless networking, permission management, and now the cloud security. And Daniel will talk about the secret security transformation hidden in modern workplace enablement.
All right, well, thank you everyone for joining my session. I know the title is a bit of a mouthful, the secret security transformation hidden in modern workplace enablement. And over the next 25 minutes, I will endeavor to explain to you what that means and unlock some hidden secrets for you. What I'm going to do right now is I'll turn off my video just so that it doesn't overlap any of the slides. And then at the end, for questions, if there are any, then I'll turn my video back on. But let's get started here. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who's attending this session that the modern workplace has evolved quite rapidly over the last couple of years and is continuing to evolve and transform as we speak. You know, more than ever, we have more users working outside of the office. They're working from home, they're working from coffee shops, they're road warriors, they're working from around the world, and they need to access applications the same as if they were at the office. We've got applications that have somewhat become mobile in that they're no longer sitting at the office as well. They've moved and they're migrating to SaaS applications. They're migrating to IaaS and PaaS platforms as well. And there are challenges inherent with that. And then obviously we've got mergers, acquisitions, divestitures. We've got third-party partners who need access to all of these applications. And what we're finding is the way that we've been providing access to these applications needs to evolve and hasn't evolved yet for a lot of companies and organizations. So that's what we're going to talk about. And I'm going to highlight, as we go through this transformation together, some of the missed opportunities for security transformation that are inherent in these conversations. So let's move forward here. I thought we could start by going over some common conversations. And you'll see in the title of this slide, I've said with the networking team. And usually when we're talking about, remote access, modernizing how we access these applications, we find it's the networking team that comes to us and says, we've got some key themes here that we want to talk to you about and see if we can come up with a solution together. And one of the themes that usually comes up is, just a generic, hey, we're looking for the next gen kind of seamless remote access platform, and we're just exploring all of the options available to us today. What we can tell you is our current remote access VPN solution isn't keeping up with the pace of change of our workplace. And that's for some of the reasons that I mentioned in the beginning. Another thing that the networking team will come to us with is that third-party access, right? More than ever, we have third-party external contractors, partners who need to have access to all of these applications. And if anybody's ever gone through provisioning access for third-party entities, you'll find and hopefully agree with me that provisioning that access, managing that access, securing that access is a lot more painful than just provisioning access for an internal employee. And so they'll come to us and say, our remote access solution needs to be able to handle this. And right now we can make it work. We can kludge some stuff together, but it's very complex and difficult to manage. And they say, these are the themes that we want help with. We want to talk to you about these. We recognize that you've got some expertise in this. Our goal, when we get to the end of this and we modernize the way that we're giving all of these users access to applications, we have some expected results, right? One, we want to make sure that our employees are productive regardless of where they are, right? It should be the same experience for them if they're at the office as if they're at home. If they're anywhere in the world, they need to be able to access this and have the same user experience. Two, we need to be able to adapt and stay agile. as we grow, we want to, obviously we're in business, so we want to grow revenues, right? And how we're going to do that is we're going to release new products and services. And a lot of times there's applications that come along with those that need to be accessed. And we can't take a month, 2 month, 3 month to spin these applications up and provision access to all the required entities, whether they're internal or third parties, or we're not going to recognize the revenues, and our competitors are going to end up being more agile than we are, which we can't have. And 3, you know, more than ever, I get pulled into conversations about mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures. And there are some seriously complicated challenges that come along with having to merge 2 different company networks together, right? Offhand, I can think of, you know, what if they have overlapping subnets, right? How do we deal with that? Well, we have to do some fancy natting, or somebody's got to re-IP their network. And either solution is very, very complex and very time consuming. If you don't take the time to plan those things, inevitably some sort of business continuity issue comes up where people lose access to something that they need to have access to, and help desk gets a lot of calls. Same thing with divestitures, right? How do we split off portions of our company, or and make sure that we still maintain security on our stuff, but we're not allowing a lot of our security and our data to go out the door with the divestiture? And how do we do that quickly? Because that's what our shareholders demand. So they come to us. And again, the reason why I called out the networking team here is, like I said, this is usually the networking team comes to us and says, this kind of falls under our purview. This is what we've been handed. And we say, hey, you know what? Wouldn't it be great if we pulled in the security team, because we think they're going to see some benefits as we go along this journey. And this is really the reason why I'm doing this talk, is usually the answer is like, yeah, you know what? Let's leave them out of it for now. This has nothing to do with security. And I think hopefully if I do my job well, by the end, you're going to realize, oh, you know what? Maybe there are a lot of security benefits in modernizing the way we do remote access, that we need to get both teams in the room to get all the benefits out of this. So let's move forward. And by move forward, I mean, let's start our journey together at what the network looks like today, right? I have an idea of what modernized looks like, but if we don't start here at the beginning of what we're currently doing for remote access, we can't figure out what the transformational steps in between are. So that's why I brought this up on the screen. And it's a very generic look at how some companies do remote access. Now, your mileage may vary depending on the size and complexity of your team and your organization. But for the most part, this is a pretty representative sample, right? We've got applications over here on the left that are sitting on the corporate network somewhere. We've got a security stack protecting those applications from the outside world. And we've got these users. And these users can be anywhere in the world, and they need to access those applications. So what do? Well, we put a VPN client on their device, and it allows them to tunnel. Now, this is IPsec tunnel. Odds are it's probably going to be an SSL, more accurately, a TLS tunnel these days, going to some VPN concentrators at the data center to allow them to access it. Now, there's a couple things that have to happen here. They need to know where to connect, right? So this client needs to know an IP address, or more likely it needs to know a domain name that's going to resolve into an IP address, right? So I have to publish this as the company. I have to publish this to the rest of the world so that my clients know what to connect to. And that increases my attack surface, one, because while the people I want to be able to find it can find it, all the people on the internet who I don't want to be able to find it can also find it, right? So it's a surface for them to potentially attack. I'm not saying they're going to be successful, but it's another surface for them to be able to attack, at least as a DDoS, for example. So let's just say we go through here, we connect to the VPN concentrator, we're going to authenticate the user so we know they are who they say they are, and then we're going to give them an internal IP address, right? So we're going to now have a client who has a public IP address, which is wherever they happen to be in the world, and they've got an IP address that is routable on the internal network at the data center or at the company, right? So anything that is routable from a server perspective, this user can now access. That's why it's a virtual private network connection, right? They are now on the network and they can access stuff. They know what the topology looks like. in the environment. And then usually security's involved at this point, and they say, hey, well, hold up here. This doesn't make any sense. We can't have unfettered access to our internal network for all of these remote users. That doesn't make any sense. We're going to do some network-based segmentation, right? We're going to drop in some hardware here, and you'll notice I've got redundancy and scalability built in by having multiples of everything. We're going to drop in some firewalls and do some network segmentation. And we're going to say, you know, finance can only access this server. So we're going to build a firewall policy that stops finance from going anywhere but this server. Then marketing is going to come in. They only want to access this server. Our sales team only accesses this server. IT accesses all of those servers. So very quickly, as I look at all of the different roles within my company, this firewall policy grows and grows and becomes more and more complex. And then we get it built. Great. We push policy to these firewalls. Life is good. People start accessing them remotely, and the help desk calls come in, and we've got all of these different exceptions that we didn't think of when we made these firewall policies to begin with. So we start punching holes. And if anybody's worked on help desk before, you know, time to resolution is paramount. So usually what happens is these firewalls start looking like Swiss cheese as we punch bigger and bigger holes to make more and more exceptions. And so usually what happens is these end users, even with the firewall policies in place, end up with basically unfettered access, or we get fed up depending on the size of our organization. We just rip those network segmentation firewalls out to begin with because we can't manage it. Right, so we're going to put them back in here for now. We're going to leave them in there. And the next thing that happens is, well, these applications, they start to move on us, right? We've done all of this hard work to get remote access in, and it's somewhat stable, it's somewhat okay, fairly secure. And then our applications move out to an IaaS or a PaaS location like AWS or Azure, whatever the case may be. And what do we do then? Well, we've put all of this in place for them to access it when the applications are here, but now the applications moved outside of our firewall. So we can, you know, virtualize this security stack, right? We've already got a security stack here that's protecting us. Maybe we can virtualize it and try to mimic it here, right? But the costs and complexity of that grow exponentially as more and more IaaS and PaaS platforms come into play, right? So manageability becomes a nightmare. So usually what happens is we end up with a subset of the security stack here. The other alternative is, well, we can do some hairpinning, right? We've got users VPNing already to this VPN concentrator. Let's send them all in there, and then we'll pass them through the existing security stack, and we'll have a site-to-site VPN tunnel between our corporate data center and this IaaS and PaaS location, and they'll go through there. Security goes up, fantastic, that's good news. User experience and performance dramatically decreases because of this hairpinning, right? And like I said, as more and more applications come into play and more platforms come into play, this hairpinning just multiplies and multiplies. And this is the problem with kind of kludging together the old method of doing remote access to all of these applications in the modern workplace. We can get it done, but security is compromised, end user experience is compromised, manageability is compromised, and nobody is fully satisfied with the solution. So we say, great, this is where we are today. Understood. Let's pull security in and move forward. Nope, we're going to stick with the networking team for now. This is a networking problem. We'll pull them in if we need to. Okay, let's move forward. Let's look at what modern access to applications look like. You look, and on the surface, it doesn't look that different. So you'll probably notice that the VPN concentrators disappeared and this zero trust exchange appeared in the middle. And this is the big difference, right? We've still got clients that need to access these applications. We've still got a piece of software on the client to send their traffic, forward their traffic off to a location. But rather than publishing IP addresses here and having DNS records pointing to those IP addresses and having an attack surface and having ingress rules to get to VPN concentrators, we're going to say, you know what, the client just needs to connect to the zero trust exchange in the cloud. Regardless of where they are, there's data centers all around the world, they connect to the zero trust exchange closest to them. This is where we are going to facilitate the authentication for them. This is where the policies for authorization are going to live. So when a client says, I need to access the finance server, they connect, they are who they say they are, great. Let's check the policy. Yes, this person is allowed to access the finance server. So what do? Do we then punch a hole and send them into finance? No, that's not the modern way. That's the old way of doing it. What we do is we have these application connectors at the data center, close to these application servers. They can communicate with the finance server, and then they communicate outbound from your network to the same zero trust exchange, and we stitch the connection together there, right? And the value of doing that is, again, it's an outbound connection. There's no inbound connectivity happening. These applications connectors can see all of the different applications. They can see what people are requesting access to, but they're only providing user to application connectivity in this case. And that's the other thing that's different about this. You'll see these firewalls that we had in the old school method of doing remote access don't exist, right? Because a user is connected to an application. They're not given an internal IP address on your network. They can't see the topology. They can't see what else is there. They can't even do reconnaissance via DNS. If they don't have access to it via this zero trust exchange, their connection is never going to be stitched together with one of these other things. So the application segmentation is inherent to using a zero trust exchange. I don't have to put in additional network-based segmentation to segment these guys off. Finance can only access finance. Marketing can only access marketing. Sales can only access sales, because that's the only time we'll stitch together their connections, right? So if we can summarize that into a couple of benefits, 4 benefits, right? So 1, application access no longer requires access to the network, right? They don't need that internal IP address. They don't need to have visibility into the topology so they can do reconnaissance and see where they can laterally move around, right? We've got inside out connectivity for the applications. So rather than this user calling all the way into the application and us having to facilitate that, the application meets the user halfway in the zero trust exchange. It calls outbound. So I don't have that public facing attack surface that opens me up to things like DDoS or other compromise attempts. Okay. 3rd, the application segmentation without network segmentation is built in and inherent to this technology, right? I don't have to put in firewalls anymore to segment off the applications and do role-based access via firewalling. It's built in. We're not going to stitch your connection to a server that you don't have access to via policy. And then 3rd, because we're using TLS encrypted tunnels everywhere, the end user experience is such that the internet becomes a lot like your corporate LAN, right? Regardless of where they are, the end user's experience is exactly the same for the end user, right? They don't have to learn one method for when they're at the office and another method for when they're on the road, right? Very powerful. And thinking back to the title, I said, the secret security transformation. So I want to loop in an example. And if anybody read the description of what this talk was about, I referenced ransomware. It's an easy one to talk about. We could reference other types of attacks, but it's an easy one to talk about because everybody's aware of what ransomware is. And, we moved to the cloud, we created all these new security technologies, and ransomware is just one of those things that just won't go away. It's like the cockroach of the security industry. And it's evolved. Right before ransomware, a ransomware attack used to be, I get something gets infected in the machine, and then the ransomware goes out and just encrypts everything, and I get a ransom note, and that's the entire attack. How it's being used today is, I've got an outside attacker. We'll assume he's done some reconnaissance. He sends me a phishing email with a Google Doc with a malicious macro or something in it. End user opens the email, opens the doc because the doc was about them authorizing a raise or whatever the case may be. Their machine gets infected. From there, I want to go out and try to own some domain controllers so I can get some privilege escalation happening. I can steal privileges on the box I'm on, as well as any other box that I can see. I want to move laterally. And the reason why I'm moving laterally from server to server in this case is so that I can find the crown jewels in the network, right? I want to find all the juicy data that I can steal and monetize. And only after I've done that as an attacker do I think ransomware. The ransomware is the icing on the cake in this case. It used to be the entire purpose of the attack. Now it's just the second payoff, right? I'm going to get the payoff from stealing the data. That's the real payoff. This one is the icing, right? So either way, I get cake. And if we look at this from the perspective of how we're modernizing access to these applications, just with those blinders on, there is the opportunity for us via the zero trust mechanism, the authentication of user to application connectivity, the built-in application segmentation, then we have the ability to stop or dramatically slow down this type of attack by stopping the lateral movement, the stealing of credentials, the owning of the domain controller, because we're maybe using a SAML source or something like that, right? So yeah, there's stuff we could do here with the Zero Trust Exchange for inspection that the security team needs to be made aware of. And there's stuff we could do here about, exfiltrating that data that the security team needs to be made aware of that we can accomplish with the Zero Trust Exchange as far as inspection. But if the only thing we do is transform how we're accessing these applications, there's still right in the middle, we can potentially break this chain, okay? And that's kind of the point that I want to drive home. Even though it's not a security project, the networking team should really be involved in this, because if we're not letting them know that we're doing this from a networking perspective, they're going to go out and duplicate the effort and explore network segmentation projects. They're going to explore zero trust options, and you're going to end up doubling your spend or potentially doubling your effort. Okay, so that's just one example. But really, if we go high level on it, these are the same points that I had on the slide. So if you've already read them, you don't need to, I just put them there as a summary. At a high level, we've achieved the three things that the networking team came for, but also by modernizing, we've achieved this mitigation of risk and ensuring business continuity. And the reason why I want to call that out is let's quickly look at what the transformation looks like, right? And so how you read this is we're going to start on the left. This is the present day, and we're going to work our way to the right. So as we modernize this access to applications, there's going to be some stuff that we accomplish in the environment. So one, we're going to put the client on the device. We're going to have the app connectors in there that are going to discover all of the different applications that users are accessing. We're going to get a nice inventory of everything. Great. We're going to move forward. Once they're accessing it, instead of via VPN, we can rip the VPN out. We can start talking about reducing the network segmentation. We've got ISP operational costs in place. But if security is not in the room with us at this point, they don't realize that, right? We're not going to see the inherent benefits of all this app segmentation because they're not in the conversation yet. Right? So they're blissfully unaware, they're off researching this stuff on their own, and we're duplicating efforts, right? We're going to move forward. We're going to start to get some more network benefits around bandwidth control, potentially peering with Office 365, whatever the case may be for our data centers. But again, security hasn't been involved in the conversation, so we miss out on all the good conversation around reducing some of that egress inspection. We miss out on all the conversation about advanced threat protection, cloud firewalling. Moving forward, great. We've got it. Our employees are accessing stuff. Security's still researching all this stuff on the back end. We're going to enable our third parties to access it, maybe via browser-based. If we don't want to put a client on there, that's fantastic. We're going to get that benefit. But again, you're noticing a trend here. Security's not in the conversation. We're missing out on all this benefit, right? And the reason why I'm calling this out, we can go all the way across and mark off all the stuff with an X that, hey, security doesn't know we're doing this, even though they're getting the benefit of doing it with the zero trust exchanges. From a networking team perspective, if I want to justify modernizing this, wouldn't it be helpful if I can get some security wins when I go to justify this to the business? Absolutely. But if I don't pull in the security team to help me justify that and get them to recognize these benefits, then it's going to be a lot harder for me to even sell the modern transformation, let alone get all the security benefits. Okay, so something to think about. And I know we're getting low on time here. We're getting to 11:23. So maybe what I'm going to do is go to the last slide, the moral of the story. This is my moral of the story. If I'm saying anything at all, it's that applications and the way users access those applications is going to continue to transform. The networking team is doing a great job of investigating ways to transform and keep pace. The security team is off doing its thing, figuring out how do we secure all this stuff? And in the middle, there's this sweet spot where if we do it right and we use a zero trust exchange in the middle, everybody gets to recognize some benefits, but we only get to recognize those benefits if all of us are in the room from the beginning. We can't start down the road, do the modernization, I'll happily work with any networking team to get this done. And then after we've deployed it, call in the security team and say, hey, look at this stuff. It's too late by that point, right? We have to pull them in and have them involved. So my ask is networking team, if you're going through a project like this, and I hope you are, if you're going through a project like this, go across the hall, pull in the security team, because there's going to be some benefits that they're likely not aware of that typically wouldn't have existed in the old school method of doing remote access that will exist, that they need to be educated on. Security team, if you know that your networking team is going through a project like this, a transformational project, again, go across the hall, ask to be involved. You'll be surprised at the hidden security transformations that are available to you in that project. Okay, and with that, I want to open it up to questions, if anybody has any. So let me look this up here, and I'm going to turn on my video now so everybody can see me. So I've got a question that says, how to get more visibility of the security risk? And that's a really broad question. There's a couple ways. So by having the application connectors, for example, be close to the applications and full visibility being in line with how the users are accessing stuff, what we see is usually teams discover, one, applications that they didn't even realize their remote users were accessing to begin with, right? So there's one increase in visibility. It kind of gives you the ability to discover all the shadow IT happening in the environment, whether it's on-prem or whether it's in an IaaS or PaaS application. So that's step one. And then the other side of thing is, I didn't touch on it because I really am talking about modernizing the way we access the applications. That zero trust exchange, you can start to then do all kinds of inspection around what you would normally do with your security stack. So as users go out to the internet and these SaaS applications, while they're already connecting to the zero trust exchange, let's start to have visibility into, is there data leaving the environment, DLP searches, advanced threat protection, DNS security. All of this visibility is something that you can do with the zero trust exchange. I know that's a very broad and vague answer. I'm very happy if you want to reach out after the session to set up a time with you and go more in depth and more specific to what your question is. How do you manage the third-party security risk in the workplace? Great question, great question. So this is something that, again, the networking team comes to us and they say, hey, we've got these third parties, very complicated to do with VPNs. So typically what we'll do is we'll say, well, what type of applications do these third parties need to access? A lot of times, if it's just a browser-based application, fantastic. You don't need to put a client on those devices. They can access the zero trust exchange via their browser, right? So you're not putting any software, you're not having to integrate with their devices. And then we stitch the connection together the same way. So they still have to authenticate themselves via a SAML source. In this case, they still have a policy in the zero trust exchange that says they can access browser-based access to application A, right? We're not going to give them an IP address. They can't do any scanning. They can't see all of the other 50 applications that you're hosting that you could provide remote access for. They're completely unaware that that access is there. What I would recommend is reach out to myself or anyone at Zscaler, and we'll set up a time and maybe we can do some whiteboarding together, and it would make a lot more sense to get in depth because there's a lot of additional benefits for third-party risk security.